It was just an ordinary flight from Chicago to New York, or so it seemed. The passengers settled in their seats were preparing for the familiar hum of engines and the soft turbulence that accompanies a routine journey. Yet, in the blink of an eye, one simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted, transforming this flight into a moment of pure humanity that would leave everyone on board reflecting on the true meaning of sacrifice, compassion, and legacy. The man who made that act was none other than Michael Jordan, the basketball legend. But this was not a story about his athletic prowess. This was a story about his heart, a surprising gesture of kindness. As the flight began, the hum of the aircraft settled into a comforting rhythm, and passengers assumed their usual roles in the choreography of air travel. Some were settling into their seats, others adjusting seatbelts, but few could have predicted that the quietest seat on the plane would hold the most significant action of the day. In first class, Michael Jordan sat with an air of quiet composure, a figure who could command attention from any room, yet on this flight he seemed intent on blending into the background. His sweatshirt and jeans could have belonged to anyone, but his presence was unmistakable. Every now and then a glance from the passengers in first class would catch his attention, a subtle acknowledgement of the man who had changed the game of basketball forever. Yet, despite the whispers of admiration, Michael remained inwardly focused, hoping for a simple, uneventful journey. Across the aisle, in the economy section, an elderly veteran of the Gulf War slowly made his way to his seat. His movements were deliberate, slow, but filled with a quiet dignity that spoke volumes of a life lived in service. His silver hair, neatly combed, was offset by the faded patches and medals sewn into the military jacket he wore, a reminder of the decades of sacrifice and courage. There was something deeply powerful in the way he carried himself, not seeking attention, not demanding recognition, but offering a silent testament to the sacrifices he had made. As he shuffled past the other passengers, there was a slight shift in the atmosphere, an almost reverential respect that flowed through the air. Some passengers exchanged glances, others nodded subtly, but the veteran remained focused on his goal, getting to his seat, the one reserved for him in the back of the plane. Settling into the cramped space between a businessman buried in his laptop and a restless toddler squirming in her seat, the veteran's eyes revealed a world of stories untold. As the plane took off, the tension in the cabin seemed to pulse with anticipation, but the veteran was content. He was used to traveling, to being overlooked, and to finding comfort in small moments of solitude. But then, something unexpected happened. Something so simple, so profound, that it would change everything. In the midst of the growing discomfort, when the veteran's seatmate began to raise his voice in frustration about the lack of space, it was clear that the elderly man was doing his best to de-escalate the situation. Yet, despite his apologies and calm demeanor, the tension escalated. The veteran was visibly uncomfortable, his attempts at smoothing things over falling on deaf ears. The scene, which had begun as a small dispute, now turned into a spectacle. The man next to the veteran became louder, more agitated, and every eye in the cabin turned toward the unfolding drama. It was in that moment, when it seemed that the flight would become a scene of rising tension, that Michael Jordan's gaze lifted from his book. His brow furrowed, and he glanced at the commotion near the back of the plane. For a moment he hesitated, just long enough to recognize the discomfort, the unease, and the vulnerability of the veteran in the middle of it all. The air in first class felt thick with the weight of the decision Michael was about to make. He didn't think twice. Without hesitation, Michael pressed the call button, a signal that would set the course of the flight and the lives of everyone on board onto a new trajectory. His calm, measured request to the flight attendant was simple, yet filled with purpose. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady. "Could I switch seats with the gentleman in the military jacket?" The flight attendant, initially taken aback by the request, quickly processed the situation. Michael's offer was more than a simple exchange of seats. It was a lifeline, a gesture of respect that would change the course of that man's day and perhaps the rest of his life. In that one moment, Michael Jordan made a choice that transcended fame, status, and wealth. It was a decision rooted in humility, a quiet yet powerful act that would later ripple through the entire plane, filling the cabin with a renewed sense of compassion. A heartfelt decision and a remarkable encounter. As Michael Jordan made his way to the back of the plane, the entire atmosphere seemed to shift. The murmur of conversation quieted, and a ripple of curiosity spread through the cabin. Passengers who had been absorbed in their books, laptops, and smartphones suddenly became aware of the quiet power behind Michael's simple action. He wasn't walking with a swagger or the air of someone used to being in the spotlight. He moved with a sense of purpose, a quiet determination that seemed almost too grounded for a man of his global stature. The flight attendants, who had already been busy with their duties, exchanged glances, one of them quickly catching up with Michael as he moved down the aisle. There was an air of uncertainty in her step, not because she doubted Michael's request, but because what he was doing defied the usual script of celebrity behavior. This wasn't a man trying to garner attention or use his fame for gain. This was a man simply doing what he felt was right. "Excuse me, sir," the flight attendant said, her voice filled with a respectful tone. "Let me just check with the gentleman in the economy." Michael nodded, his expression serene, almost as if he were used to making decisions that didn't need to be questioned. As the flight attendant turned to walk toward the back of the plane, Michael remained standing, waiting with the quiet assurance of someone who had made up his mind long before the opportunity had arisen. The murmurs from first class were growing louder now. Passengers, sensing something significant was unfolding, exchanged curious glances. A woman seated across from Michael leaned over, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do that," she said, her eyes wide with confusion. "You paid for this seat. This is first class." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, as though the very notion of relinquishing something so luxurious, so deserved, was impossible to grasp. Michael met her gaze, his smile warm but grounded. "Some people deserve it more," he replied simply. His words carried with them a weight far greater than the exchange of a seat. In that instant, Michael's gesture transcended the physical action. It was a reminder of what true humility looked like, even in a world that often values wealth and fame above all else. He wasn't acting out of pity, but out of respect. The kind of respect you give someone who has given much, even when it seemed they had little left to give. The kind of respect that asks nothing in return, only a silent understanding of shared humanity. The flight attendant returned a moment later, her expression a mix of admiration and surprise. "He's agreed to the switch," she told Michael, her voice laced with respect. "He's really touched by your gesture." Without another word, Michael nodded, grabbed his carry-on bag, and slowly began his walk down the aisle, past rows of passengers who were now whispering to one another, each with their own version of the unfolding story. Some passengers raised their phones to capture the moment, but Michael was unaware, his focus entirely on the veteran ahead. As Michael approached the veteran's seat, the elderly man looked up in surprise, his face reflecting both gratitude and disbelief. He had lived a life of quiet service, not one expecting recognition, but one that had always valued dignity over applause. Now, here was Michael Jordan, someone who had reached the pinnacle of fame, offering him his seat. A seat that so many would have clung to, not just as a symbol of privilege, but as a sign of the value placed on one's place in the world. The veteran's voice, soft but filled with emotion, broke the silence. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his words carrying the weight of years lived in humility and sacrifice. "This is too much." Michael looked him in the eyes, his response steady, grounded. "I'm sure," he said simply, extending his hand. "Thank you for your service. Please take my seat." For a moment the veteran hesitated, searching Michael's eyes for any sign of insincerity, any trace of doubt, but there was none. What the veteran saw was a man whose actions spoke louder than any words could, an athlete who had achieved everything in the world, yet still understood that the greatest victories are often the quietest, the simplest. With a deep breath, the veteran stood, his hand firmly grasping Michael's. "Well, thank you, son," he said, his voice breaking slightly as he walked to the front of the plane. "That's mighty kind of you." As the veteran made his way toward the front, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Passengers exchanged glances, their murmurs now filled with admiration. A young mother in row 15 whispered to her son, "Did you see that? Michael Jordan gave up his first-class seat for him." Michael slid into the now vacant seat in economy, his long legs folded as he made himself comfortable in the tight space. The seat was nowhere near as spacious, and the lack of legroom would have been a struggle for anyone else, But for Michael, there was no sign of discomfort. His focus returned to his book as if this simple act were just part of his day. But it wasn't just another day. For those watching, it was a reminder of something bigger than the material comforts of life, something that transcended even the fame and accolades Michael Jordan had accumulated. It was a lesson in humility, in kindness, and in the enduring value of respecting others, even when no one is watching. In the front of the plane, the veteran was settling into Michael's former seat, visibly overwhelmed by the gesture. As he adjusted the plush armrest and settled in, a flight attendant approached with a blanket and a drink, offering him comfort. "You should have this seat," she said softly, a small smile playing on her lips. The veteran's eyes glistened with emotion as he took the drink. "It's been years since anyone treated me like this," he whispered, his voice barely audible as he stared out the window, lost in memories of times long past. The ripple effect of an unexpected act. As the flight continued its course through the sky, the quiet ripple of admiration that had started in first class began to spread throughout the cabin, subtly transforming the atmosphere. It was as if, in that one act of kindness, Michael Jordan had not only given up his seat, but had also ignited a fire within the hearts of those around him. What had initially seemed like a simple exchange of space had now become something much larger, something that would linger in the minds of those present long after the flight landed. In economy, Michael settled into the tight space, his long legs folded as he continued to read his book. The discomfort of the cramped seat was nothing compared to the warmth of his decision. He seemed entirely unbothered by the lack of comfort, as if the real reward lay in the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing. The veteran, now comfortably seated in Michael's former first-class seat, appeared overwhelmed. His expression softened as he adjusted to the plush surroundings. The simple amenities, an extra drink, a warm blanket, seemed so far removed from the days of hardship he had endured. But they were not just about physical comfort. They represented something much more profound: recognition, dignity, and respect. The veteran sat back, sipping his water slowly, his eyes distant. Perhaps he was lost in memories of the past, of the years when life had felt uncertain, when he had not known where his next meal would come from or where he would lay his head at night. As he looked out the window, a soft sigh escaped his lips. It was a sigh of reflection, of gratitude. He had seen much in his life, and the world had not always been kind. But today, in this simple act, he saw the goodness of people. The kind of goodness that doesn't come from headlines, fame, or accolades. It was the quiet, humble kindness that could change lives without asking for anything in return. Meanwhile, the murmurs from passengers in economy began to turn into whispers of admiration. Many had been watching, some subtly taking photos while others exchanged comments under their breath. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a legendary athlete stepping down from his pedestal, not for fame or recognition, but for a simple act of humanity. What had seemed like an ordinary flight was now brimming with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about a first-class seat. This was about the values that make us human: humility, compassion, and empathy. The flight attendants, too, noticed the shift in energy. They had seen their fair share of celebrity interactions, but none like this. Michael's gesture wasn't about receiving praise. It was a quiet reflection of the character that had guided his life, both on and off the court. As one of them passed by Michael in the economy section, she couldn't help but stop for a moment. "Is there anything you need, Mr. Jordan?" she asked, her voice soft, full of respect. Michael smiled, his expression warm but humble. "No, I'm all set, thank you." The flight attendant nodded, her admiration palpable. What Michael had done wasn't just generous, it was a reminder of something larger. A message that even in a world that often feels divided, small acts of kindness can be a bridge that connects us all. As the plane continued its journey, the veteran, seated in the comfort of first class, began to speak with the woman beside him, a middle-aged passenger who had quietly observed the scene. His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in his words that spoke to the deep impact Michael's gesture had on him. "You know," the veteran began, his eyes reflecting the weight of his experiences, "that young man, Michael Jordan, he's not just a basketball player, he's a man who understands what it means to truly give." The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "What do you mean?" The veteran adjusted the small purple heart pin on his lapel, and sighed. It's been a long time since anyone treated me like that. You see, back in the Gulf War, I came home injured, with no family, no support. I ended up in Iowa trying to figure out what my next steps were. I remember sitting outside a diner feeling like I had nothing. A man stopped and asked me if I was okay. He didn't just give me money or tell me to move on. He took the time to listen. That man was Michael Jordan's grandfather. The woman blinked, taken aback. Michael Jordan's grandfather? The veteran nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. Yes. He gave me more than a place to stay. He gave me hope. He helped me rebuild my life, gave me a job, and never once asked for anything in return. He simply said, "You've served this country. We owe you for that." That moment, it's been with me my whole life. The woman's expression softened as the weight of his words sank in. So now, here you are, sitting in the seat Michael Jordan gave up. It's like life has come full circle. The veteran nodded, his eyes misting slightly. It has. I always wanted to thank him, but I never had the chance. And now, here I am, with his grandson sitting quietly in the back. He's honoring the legacy his family gave me all those years ago. The conversation didn't end there. The story began to spread, whispered among passengers in first class. The veteran's words, his reflection on Michael's grandfather's kindness, had an almost magical effect, changing the mood of the entire cabin. Conversations that had once been filled with idle chatter were now filled with reverence. The simple act of one man giving up his seat had sparked a discussion about kindness, service, and the power of empathy. A man sitting across the aisle from the veteran leaned in, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but that story really hit home. My father served in the Gulf War too, and he always told me that the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact. It's the little things that make the difference." The veteran's face softened as he nodded in agreement. It's true. Back then, I thought my life was over. I didn't know how I would move forward. But someone took the time to care. That changed everything. In economy, Michael continued to read, unaware of the profound impact his gesture had created. Yet every whisper and conversation that spread through the cabin was a testament to the enduring power of his kindness. For Michael, it wasn't about being seen or praised. It was about doing the right thing when the moment called for it. And that moment had set off a ripple that would touch every person on that plane. A story of redemption in full circle. As the plane continued its journey through the clouds, the veteran's heart remained heavy with memories that stretched far beyond the flight. He had lived a life marked by service, by sacrifices that had gone unnoticed by many. But in the quiet moments of reflection, as he sat in Michael Jordan's first-class seat, it felt as though the universe had come full circle. The plane's steady hum was almost meditative, allowing the veteran to sink deeper into his thoughts. His fingers absent-mindedly adjusted the small purple heart pin on his lapel, a symbol of the many battles he had fought and the cost of freedom. Yet today, this small token of honor felt like something more personal, more meaningful than it ever had before. He glanced out the window, his eyes fixed on the shifting clouds below. Years ago, he had never imagined this moment. He had come back from the Gulf War a changed man, a man without a home, without family, and without purpose. The years that followed were filled with hardship, loneliness, and a constant struggle to find his place in a world that seemed to have moved on without him. But as his life continued to unravel, one moment, one conversation changed everything. It was in a diner in Iowa where he met Michael Jordan's grandfather, a man whose quiet generosity saved him when he had nothing left to give. The veteran remembered how the older man didn't just give him a few dollars or offer a fleeting gesture of sympathy. No, Michael Jordan's grandfather gave him something much more valuable. He gave him time. He gave him dignity. He gave him hope. I've never forgotten those words, the veteran thought to himself. You've served this country, and we owe you for that. Those words had carried him through the darkest moments of his life, and today, as he sat in the plush seat that had once been Michael's, it felt as if those words had come back to him in full force. He glanced toward the back of the plane, his gaze falling on Michael Jordan, who sat quietly in the cramped economy seat. Michael's long legs were folded, and he had returned to his book with the same calm demeanor he had shown earlier. To anyone else, Michael may have seemed unaffected by the ripple his actions had caused. But to the veteran, there was something about the moment that felt profound. Without knowing it, Michael had connected the dots between past and present. His simple act of giving up his seat wasn't just about space on a plane. It was a powerful reminder that acts of kindness, no matter how small, can have a lasting impact. And what was even more astonishing was that, in that one moment, Michael had unknowingly completed a circle that began decades ago with his grandfather. The veteran's heart swelled with gratitude as the flight attendants approached, offering him a blanket and drink. But it wasn't the comfort of the seat or the amenities that moved him most. It was the full circle that had been completed in the most unexpected of ways. Today, in the very same seat that Michael Jordan once occupied, the veteran felt as though he had been given a chance to express his deepest gratitude for the kindness that had saved him all those years ago. As the plane neared its descent, something extraordinary happened. The veteran stood up slowly, his hands gripping the armrests for balance. He knew what he had to do. He made his way down the aisle, the plane's soft hum providing a steady backdrop to the stillness in his heart. Passengers turned their heads, their curiosity piqued. They had all witnessed Michael's gesture, but what they didn't know was the deeper story that had been unfolding behind the scenes. The veteran's steps were slow but steady. When he reached Michael's row in economy, he stopped. He looked at the basketball legend with eyes full of emotion. Michael, sensing the veteran's presence, looked up from his book, his expression warm but humble. There was no need for words, but there was a shared understanding between them. The veteran extended his weathered hand, and Michael, without hesitation, stood up to shake it. "I just wanted to thank you," the veteran said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "What you did today wasn't just about this seat. It was about honoring something much larger than this moment. Your grandfather, he changed my life, and today you've carried that legacy forward." Michael's eyes softened as he grasped the veteran's hand firmly. "Thank you for your service," Michael replied quietly. "I didn't know about my grandfather's kindness, but I'm glad I could carry it forward." The veteran nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't just carry it forward, son. You proved that the values he stood for, respect, kindness, humility, are alive and well in you." The cabin was silent, save for the sound of the veteran's words hanging in the air. Passengers watched the exchange with bated breath, as if they too were witnessing something sacred, something that transcended the ordinary. Michael, who had lived a life surrounded by praise and adoration, stood there in awe of a simple act that would forever change the way he viewed kindness. As the veteran made his way back to his seat, the silence broke and a ripple of applause began. It was soft at first, hesitant even, but it quickly grew in strength, until the entire cabin erupted in gratitude. Michael, slightly embarrassed but still humble, smiled politely and nodded. He returned to his seat, his mind far from the pages of the book in front of him. Instead, he reflected on the powerful exchange that had just taken place. It wasn't about the applause or the attention. It was about the quiet connection between two people generations apart, who had been bound together by kindness, respect, and the unspoken understanding that every small act of compassion can change the world. As the plane descended into its final approach, Michael realized something profound. In the course of this one flight, a family legacy had been honored, a life had been changed, and a small ripple had transformed into a wave of gratitude that would linger far beyond the cabin walls. The story of the veteran's redemption, of the grandfather's kindness, and of Michael's unexpected act of humility had woven together in the most beautiful way, completing a circle that was more than just about a seat on an airplane. It was about humanity. It was about love. And it was about the simple power of one kind gesture which could ripple through time and across generations, leaving its mark on the hearts of all who witness. A moment of reflection and gratitude. As the plane descended toward its destination, the cabin seemed to hold a different kind of energy. A collective hum of introspection, a quiet reflection that had permeated every corner of the aircraft. The once ordinary flight, with its usual chatter and distractions, had transformed into something far more significant. It wasn't just the physical distance the plane had covered. It was the emotional journey everyone on board had experienced, a journey of humility, kindness, and connection. For Michael Jordan, seated quietly in the cramped economy seat, the world outside the window blurred into an indistinct haze. His eyes, however, weren't focused on the passing landscape. They were turned inward, reflecting on the profound exchange that had just taken place. There was a deep sense of humility in him as he sat there, contemplating the impact of his seemingly simple decision. The gesture had been spontaneous, driven by the knowledge that sometimes doing what is right doesn't require grand gestures or a crowd of onlookers. It only requires the courage to act in the moment. Yet, what Michael had done was no small thing. In choosing to give up his seat, he had inadvertently sparked a ripple that would touch not just the lives of those on that flight, but countless others in the days to come. He had unknowingly honored a legacy that stretched beyond him, his grandfather's legacy, and connected two men whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely way. There was a deep, almost spiritual resonance in the understanding that one small, selfless act had woven together the past and present, allowing a story of service, sacrifice, and redemption to unfold in a way no one could have predicted. Meanwhile, in first class, the veteran sat in the seat that Michael had given up. His fingers gently traced the edge of the armrest, the plush fabric feeling almost foreign compared to the hard benches he had grown accustomed to. He took a slow sip of water, his thoughts drifting back to the years he had spent in the service, the battles he had fought, and the struggles that followed when he returned home. His heart felt heavy, but not with sorrow. Instead, there was a deep sense of gratitude for the kindness that had shaped his life, and for the connection he had made with Michael Jordan, a connection that had bridged generations. The veteran had come home from the Gulf War broken in both body and spirit, and with no family to turn to. He had wandered, looking for solace, only to find himself sitting outside a diner in Iowa, unsure of where his next meal would come from or where he would sleep that night. It was there that Michael's grandfather had stopped, his kindness offering a lifeline when it was needed most. The words Michael's grandfather had spoken all those years ago, the simple, powerful reminder that those who served the country deserved to be recognized, had stayed with the veteran ever since. Now, sitting in Michael's seat, the veteran was not just a man who had once fought in a war. He was a living testament to the transformative power of compassion, the kind of compassion that Michael had unknowingly passed on through his small act of generosity. The veteran's hand rested on the seat's armrest, but his mind was far from the comfort of the first-class seat. His thoughts were elsewhere, as if searching for the right words to express the depth of gratitude he felt, not only for the act of kindness he had just received, but for the larger, life-changing impact of it. And as he sat there, in the lap of luxury, he couldn't help but reflect on the simple truth that it was often the smallest gestures, the ones that go unnoticed in the grand scheme of things, that make the greatest difference. That was what Michael had done for him. He had given up not just a seat, but a moment of comfort, a moment of privilege, for a man who had spent his life serving others. In that one moment, Michael had restored something far more valuable than material wealth. He had restored the dignity of a man who had long felt forgotten. In the economy section, the passengers had begun to whisper among themselves, but not with the excitement of capturing a fleeting moment on social media or gossiping about a celebrity sighting. No, these whispers were filled with something deeper, a collective realization that they had all witnessed something extraordinary. The murmurs were no longer about Michael Jordan's fame or the rarity of seeing a celebrity do something humble. They were about the simple truth that kindness, true, genuine kindness, was alive and well in the world. Michael's decision had opened the door for reflection. It was a call to everyone who had witnessed the act to consider what they could do in their own lives. Could they offer kindness in their own way, without expecting anything in return? Could they see the people around them with the same sense of respect and humanity that Michael had shown the veteran? The questions hung in the air, unspoken but felt by everyone, and for a moment the cabin was united in a rare and beautiful sense of community. As the plane neared its destination, the veteran leaned back in his seat, his eyes meeting the gaze of a young woman seated nearby. She had been listening to his story, and her eyes were filled with admiration and empathy. "You know," she said quietly, "I never thought about it that way. I always thought of heroes as the ones who get recognized in the spotlight, but now I see heroes come in all shapes and sizes. The veteran smiled gently, his voice low but firm. It's not about the recognition. It's about the little things we do for each other. Sometimes a simple gesture, a smile, a helping hand, a kind word, can make all the difference. The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with the realization of what he meant. For the first time, she saw beyond the headlines and the glitz of fame. She saw the humanity beneath it all, and in that moment, she understood. As the plane touched down, the mood was unlike any other flight. The passengers who disembarked were not simply going about their business as usual. There was a subtle shift in the air, a sense of connection that hadn't been there before. Some passengers stopped to thank Michael for his generosity, while others expressed their gratitude to the veteran for his service. The act of kindness had sparked a conversation, a shared reflection, that had the power to linger in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. For Michael, the impact of his decision was not something that needed to be articulated or even acknowledged. He had acted from a place of sincerity, and that sincerity had done more than just change the course of a flight. It had changed the hearts of everyone on board. As he walked toward the baggage claim, Michael reflected on the quiet wisdom of his grandfather. He could feel the weight of the moment, a reminder that even in a world where the loudest voices often get the attention, it is the quiet, unseen acts of kindness that have the greatest power to change lives. And for Michael, that truth was something he would carry with him always. As you reflect on the powerful connection that unfolded on that flight, we encourage you to take a moment to consider how small acts of kindness can ripple through our own lives. Michael Jordan's gesture wasn't just about giving up a seat, it was about honoring a legacy, showing respect for others, and making the world a little brighter through compassion. Now it's your turn. What small acts of kindness have made a difference in your life? How have you seen kindness ripple out and create unexpected connections? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your stories, and your reflections in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation and inspire each other to live with empathy, humility, and gratitude. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness and the impact it can have on the world, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories like this one. Together, we can create a community where small gestures of kindness make the world a better place. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and remember, the world is waiting for your next act of kindness.